Blood-red light spilled across the horizon as Rebecca Stevens pressed a cold washcloth to her swollen cheek, her fingers trembling so severely she could barely hold it in place. The bruise was already darkening beneath her eye, matching the older ones that dotted her arms like a constellation of suffering. Her husband Vernon's words still rang in her ears. "Try to leave me again, and I swear to God, I'll put you in the ground." It was 1878 in Enid, Oklahoma Territory, and Rebecca knew what it meant to be a wife, to obey, to serve, to endure. But after 3 years of marriage to the town's most prosperous merchant, she wasn't certain she would survive much longer. Vernon's temper had worsened with each passing season, his jealousy and rage growing like a cancer that consumed whatever good might have once existed between them. Rebecca stared at her reflection in the small mirror hanging above the washbasin. At 22, she looked far older than her years, her once vibrant auburn hair now dull, her green eyes shadowed with exhaustion and fear. She had been pretty once, enough to catch Vernon's eye when he'd visited her father's struggling farm. The marriage had seemed a blessing, then stability and security for her family. Now it felt like a death sentence. A knock at the back door startled her from her thoughts. Rebecca hurriedly adjusted her collar to hide the marks on her neck and pushed her hair forward to partially conceal her bruised face. Few people came to the service entrance of their grand white house on the edge of town. Vernon would be furious if someone saw her in this state. Through the window, she spotted Mrs. Holloway, the elderly widow who sometimes brought eggs from her small farm outside town. Rebecca sighed with relief. Mrs. Holloway was kind and discreet. "Just a moment," Rebecca called, her voice steadier than she felt. When she opened the door, Mrs. Holloway's smile quickly faded. "Oh, child," she whispered, her weathered face creasing with concern. Again, Rebecca looked away. "It's nothing, Mrs. Holloway. I was careless on the stairs." The older woman's eyes narrowed. "The same stairs that gave you that split lip last month. And the broken wrist before Christmas." She set down her basket of eggs and took Rebecca's hands in her own. "My dear girl, you need help." "There's no help for a wife against her husband," Rebecca said softly. "Not here, not anywhere." Mrs. Holloway squeezed her fingers. "There's always help if you know where to look. My sister runs a women's boarding house in Colorado. I could write to her." "No," Rebecca's fear surged. "He'd find me. He said if I tried to leave again." She couldn't finish the sentence. Again, Rebecca swallowed hard. She'd never told anyone about her failed attempt to escape 6 months earlier. Vernon had caught her at the stage-coach office, dragged her home by her hair, and locked her in the root cellar for 3 days. "It doesn't matter. He'd never let me go." Mrs. Holloway's expression hardened. "That man is the devil himself. If your father were still alive—" "But he isn't," Rebecca interrupted. "And my mother depends on Vernon's support now." She picked up the basket of eggs, eager to change the subject. "Thank you for these. How much do I owe you?" The older woman waved away the question. "Nothing at all. But promise me you'll be careful, and if you ever need refuge, even for a night, my door is always open." Rebecca nodded, though they both knew she would never dare. Vernon would burn Mrs. Holloway's humble home to the ground if he suspected the woman of helping her. After Mrs. Holloway left, Rebecca busied herself with preparing Vernon's favorite dinner. Perhaps a well-cooked meal would keep his temper in check tonight. She worked methodically, chopping vegetables and preparing the venison stew he preferred, all while trying to ignore the throbbing pain in her cheek and the anxiety that twisted her stomach into knots. As she worked, she gazed out the kitchen window toward the endless prairie that stretched beyond their property. Freedom lay somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, in places she had only read about in books or heard described by travelers passing through Enid. places she would never see. The sound of horses approaching broke her reverie. Vernon wasn't due home for hours. His general store didn't close until sundown. Curious, Rebecca moved to the front parlor window, careful to remain hidden behind the lace curtains. A group of riders was coming down the main road toward town, cowboys driving a small herd of cattle, dust rising in clouds around them. They were likely heading to the stockyards on the other side of Enid. Such sights were common enough, especially with spring roundups underway at the larger ranches. One rider caught her attention, tall and broad-shouldered, sitting easy in the saddle as he guided his horse alongside the meandering cattle. Even from this distance, there was something compelling about him, something in the way he carried himself that spoke of confidence without Vernon's characteristic arrogance. As if sensing her gaze, the cowboy looked up toward the house. Rebecca immediately stepped back from the window, her heart racing inexplicably. She shook her head at her own foolishness. She had more important concerns than watching strange cowboys pass through town. Rebecca returned to the kitchen and continued with dinner preparations, pushing all thoughts of escape and freedom from her mind. Dreams were dangerous things for women in her position. When Vernon returned home that evening, his mood was darker than usual. He barely acknowledged the meal she had prepared, picking at it sullenly while nursing a glass of whiskey. "The cattle drive from the Triple M Ranch arrived today," he said finally, his voice deceptively casual. Rebecca kept her eyes on her plate. "Oh, saw you watching them from the window." A chill ran through her. "I heard the horses, that's all. I was curious who was passing by." Vernon's fingers tightened around his glass. "Curious about those cowboys, were you? Finding your husband's company lacking?" "No, Vernon, of course not." Rebecca's pulse quickened. "I only looked out for a moment." He pushed his plate away and stood, looming over her. "Don't lie to me, Rebecca. I've warned you about lying." "I'm not lying," she whispered, fighting to keep her voice steady. Vernon grabbed her chin, forcing her face up. "You think I don't know what goes through that pretty head of yours? You think I don't see how you look at other men?" "I've never looked at another man," Rebecca protested, wincing as his fingers dug into her already bruised skin. "Your father sold you to me fair and square," Vernon hissed, his breath hot with whiskey. "You're mine until death do us part. Don't you ever forget that." He released her so suddenly she nearly fell from her chair, then stalked to the parlor where he poured himself another drink. Rebecca sat frozen, her dinner untouched, as silent tears slid down her face. Vernon's moods were growing more unpredictable, his jealousy more consuming. How long before his threats became reality? The following morning, Rebecca rose early to prepare Vernon's breakfast before he left for the store. He was coldly polite. The storm of the previous evening temporarily passed. This was his way, violence followed by a calculating calm that was almost more terrifying than his rage. "I'll be late tonight," he informed her as he donned his hat. "Meeting with suppliers." "Have dinner ready at 8, not earlier." "Yes, Vernon." Rebecca kept her eyes lowered, her posture submissive. It was easier this way, to bend rather than break. "And Rebecca," he paused at the door, "stay home today. No errands in town. I don't want you around those cowboys while they're doing business." After he left, Rebecca moved mechanically through her morning chores, sweeping and dusting rooms that were already immaculate. The house that had once seemed a palace compared to her father's modest farmhouse now felt like a prison. Its fine furnishings and expensive draperies merely gilded bars on her cage. By midday, the silence of the empty house was suffocating. Despite Vernon's orders, Rebecca decided to walk to the small creek that ran behind their property. He wouldn't know, and she desperately needed fresh air. The April sun was warm on her face as she followed the narrow footpath down to the water. Spring wildflowers dotted the grass, bright splashes of color against the verdant new growth. Rebecca found a flat rock beside the creek and sat, removing her shoes to dip her toes in the cool water. For a few precious moments, she allowed herself to simply exist, without fear or pretense. The sound of approaching hoofbeats startled her from her reverie. Rebecca scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. If Vernon had returned early and found her gone from the house. But it wasn't Vernon who appeared around the bend in the creek. The rider who emerged from the stand of cottonwoods was the same cowboy she had noticed the day before. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. He reined his horse to a stop when he saw her, surprise evident on his face. "Beg your pardon, madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Didn't mean to disturb you." Rebecca quickly stepped back, suddenly aware of her bare feet and disheveled appearance. "You're on private property," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. The cowboy's expression turned apologetic. "Sorry about that. Creek looked like the best way to water my horse without heading all the way back to town." He studied her face for a moment, his gaze lingering on her bruised cheek. "Are you all right, madam?" Rebecca's hand flew to her face. She'd forgotten to apply the rice powder she usually used to conceal Vernon's handiwork. "I'm fine, just clumsy." The lie felt bitter on her tongue. "You should go." "My husband doesn't appreciate trespassers." "Your husband?" The cowboy's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That would be Vernon Stevens, I reckon, the storekeeper." Rebecca nodded, surprised. "You know him. Met him this morning when we were arranging to sell some cattle." He dismounted, keeping a respectful distance but clearly in no hurry to leave. "I'm Tyler Blackwell, foreman for the M. Rebecca Stevens," she replied automatically, then immediately regretted giving her name. Vernon would be livid if he learned she'd spoken to one of the cowboys he'd explicitly warned her about. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Stevens." Tyler's voice was gentle, his manner courteous. Nothing like the rough, uncouth cowboys Vernon had described. "That's a nasty bruise you've got there." Rebecca turned away. "I should get back to the house, of course." Tyler didn't move to stop her, but his next words froze her in place. "My mother had bruises like that. Used to tell everyone she was clumsy too." Rebecca's breath caught. She looked back at him, seeing nothing but compassion in his eyes. "What happened to her?" she asked softly. "She died before she could leave him." Tyler's voice was matter of fact, but Rebecca could hear the old pain beneath his words. "I was 14. Too young to help her then. Not too young to recognize the signs now." Rebecca felt exposed, as if this stranger had peeled away all her carefully constructed defenses with just a few sentences. "You don't know anything about me or my marriage." "I know fear when I see it, Mrs. Stevens." Tyler gathered his horse's reins. "And I know nobody deserves to live with it." He mounted his horse in one fluid motion, then looked down at her with an expression that made Rebecca's heart beat faster for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "I'll be in town for the next few days, settling our business. If you need anything at all, I'm staying at the boarding house on Main Street." Before Rebecca could respond, he tipped his hat again and rode away, leaving her standing barefoot beside the creek, more shaken by this brief encounter than by all Vernon's threats. That evening, Vernon returned home in high spirits, a rare occurrence that immediately put Rebecca on edge. His good moods were often as dangerous as his bad ones, unpredictable and fleeting. "The deal with the M is almost complete," he announced as he hung his hat by the door. "Finest cattle I've seen in months. We'll make a handsome profit supplying the Army contract." Rebecca nodded, carefully placing his dinner on the table. "That's wonderful news, Vernon. The foreman's a sharp one, young but knows his business." Vernon seated himself at the head of the table. "Fellow named Blackwell." Rebecca nearly dropped the gravy boat. She steadied her hands with effort, praying Vernon hadn't noticed her reaction. "How interesting. I've invited him to dinner tomorrow night." Vernon cut into his beef, oblivious to Rebecca's panic. "Thought it might help seal the deal if he sees I'm a family man with a beautiful wife and a proper home." Rebecca's stomach twisted. "Tomorrow? I'm not sure I have enough prepared for a guest. You'll manage," Vernon interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Wear the blue dress I bought you last Christmas, and do something with your face. Can't have our guest thinking I married a woman who walks into doors." Rebecca nodded mutely, her mind racing. Having Tyler Blackwell in their home would be disastrous. What if he mentioned their meeting by the creek? What if Vernon somehow sensed the strange connection she'd felt with the cowboy? "He's staying in town until Friday," Vernon continued between bites, "then heading back to the ranch with his payment. Friday, 3 days from now." Rebecca's thoughts drifted unbidden to what Tyler had said about his mother, about recognizing the signs, about her not deserving to live in fear. For the first time in months, a dangerous spark of hope flickered in her chest. She quickly extinguished it. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with Vernon watching her every move. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Rebecca baked bread and pies, roasted a chicken, and polished every piece of silver in the house. All the while, her anxiety built like a gathering storm. Every time she pictured Tyler Blackwell sitting at their dining table, looking at her with those knowing eyes, she felt ill with dread. By late afternoon, Rebecca had done all she could to prepare for dinner. She bathed carefully, then dressed in the blue silk gown Vernon had specified. It was beautiful but impractical, with a neckline lower than she preferred and tight lacing that restricted her movement. Vernon liked her to look expensive, like another possession he had acquired. She applied rice powder liberally to her bruised face, pinched her cheeks for color, and arranged her hair in an elegant knot. The woman who stared back from the mirror looked like a porcelain doll, beautiful, fragile, and hollow-eyed. Vernon returned home earlier than usual, dressed in his finest suit. He inspected Rebecca critically, circling her as if she were merchandise up for auction. "You'll do," he decided finally. "Remember your place tonight. Speak when spoken to, nothing more. I don't want Blackwell getting any ideas about my wife." "Yes, Vernon." Rebecca kept her eyes downcast, the perfect picture of wifely submission. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock sounded at the front door. Vernon straightened his tie and gave Rebecca one last warning look before going to answer it. Rebecca remained in the parlor, her hands clasped tightly to stop their trembling. She heard the low rumble of male voices, Vernon's artificial laughter, and then footsteps approaching. "And here's my lovely wife," Vernon announced, entering the parlor with Tyler Blackwell a step behind him. "Rebecca, this is Mr. Blackwell, foreman of the Triple M Ranch." Rebecca raised her eyes slowly, bracing herself for the moment of recognition. Tyler stood tall and imposing in the doorway, dressed in clean but simple clothes that stood in stark contrast to Vernon's ostentation. His sandy hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. When their eyes met, not a flicker of familiarity crossed his features. "Mrs. Stevens," he said politely, bowing slightly. "Thank you for welcoming me into your beautiful home." Rebecca curtsied slightly, relief and confusion warring within her. "The pleasure is ours, Mr. Blackwell." Vernon beamed, oblivious to the undercurrents between them. "Shall we proceed to dinner?" Rebecca has prepared a feast worthy of a cattle baron. Throughout the meal, Tyler maintained the perfect facade of a respectful business associate. He complimented the food, discussed cattle prices with Vernon, and treated Rebecca with cordial but distant politeness. Not once did he betray that they had ever met before. It was only when Vernon excused himself briefly to retrieve some documents from his study that Tyler's mask slipped. The moment they were alone, his eyes locked with Rebecca's, intense and unwavering. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Rebecca glanced nervously toward the study door. "Please, don't let him know we've met. I know." Tyler's expression hardened. "I've seen men like him before, but my offer stands. If you need help, I'm here until Friday." Before Rebecca could respond, Vernon's footsteps sounded in the hallway. Tyler immediately resumed his previous demeanor, leaning back in his chair with an easy smile as Vernon re-entered the room. The remainder of the evening passed without incident. Tyler took his leave shortly after 9, thanking them both for their hospitality. As Vernon showed him out, Rebecca began clearing the table, her mind racing with possibilities she'd never dared consider before. Tyler Blackwell was leaving on Friday, 3 days from now. Could she be ready by then? Did she have the courage to try again, knowing what Vernon would do if he caught her? "He seems impressed with our operation," Vernon said smugly, returning to the dining room. "I think we'll have a long and profitable relationship with the Triple M." Rebecca nodded absently, continuing to stack plates. Vernon caught her wrist, his fingers digging in painfully. "You were quiet tonight." "You asked me to speak only when spoken to," she reminded him, trying to keep her voice steady. His grip tightened. "And did Blackwell speak to you while I was gone?" Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. "He merely complimented the meal." Vernon studied her face, searching for signs of deception. Finally, he released her wrist. "Good. I don't trust men like him around beautiful women. Cowboys have no respect for marriage vows." Rebecca resumed clearing the table, careful to keep her expression neutral despite the storm of emotions within her. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to contemplate escape not as an impossible dream, but as a tangible possibility. That night, as Vernon slept beside her, Rebecca stared at the ceiling and made her decision. She would leave on Friday, with or without Tyler Blackwell's help. She would rather die trying to escape than continue living in this elegant prison where her spirit withered a little more each day. The next morning, Vernon left for the store earlier than usual, eager to finalize the cattle deal. Rebecca waited until she was certain he was gone, then began her preparations. She couldn't take much. A small carpet bag would have to suffice. A change of clothes, her mother's locket, the little money she had managed to secretly save from household accounts over the years. She worked quickly, her heart pounding with each creak of the old house. Everything had to appear normal if Vernon returned unexpectedly. By midday, her meager possessions were packed and hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the pantry. Rebecca was just replacing the board when a knock at the back door froze her in place. She hastily smoothed her skirts and crossed to the door, praying it wasn't one of Vernon's friends checking on her as he sometimes arranged. To her astonishment, Tyler Blackwell stood on the back step, hat in hand. His expression was grave, his eyes darting past her to check if she was alone. "Mr. Blackwell," Rebecca stammered. "Vernon isn't home, I know," he said quietly. "I waited until I saw him enter the bank. May I come in? It's important." Rebecca hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. Tyler entered quickly, closing the door behind him. "I shouldn't be here," Rebecca said, wringing her hands. "If Vernon found out, that's why I came." Tyler's voice was urgent. "Mrs. Stevens, Rebecca, I overheard something this morning that concerns you." Rebecca stilled. "What do you mean?" "I was at the livery stable when your husband came in. He was talking to the blacksmith. Didn't know I could hear." Tyler's expression darkened. "He said he's planning to move you to his new property in Indian Territory next week. Said it would be good to get you away from town where you've been getting ideas above your station." The blood drained from Rebecca's face. Vernon had mentioned purchasing land in Indian Territory months ago, a remote homestead far from any town or settlement. If he took her there, she would be completely isolated, totally at his mercy. "He can't," she whispered, though she knew he could. As her husband, Vernon had every legal right to take her wherever he pleased. "I'm leaving for the Triple M on Friday," Tyler continued. "I could help you get away. The ranch is just across the border in Kansas. You'd be safe there until you decided where to go next." Rebecca shook her head, though everything in her yearned to accept his offer. "You don't understand. Vernon would never stop looking for me. He'd kill anyone who helped me escape. I can't let you risk your life." "Some risks are worth taking." Tyler stepped closer, his blue eyes intense. "I couldn't help my mother. Let me help you." Rebecca turned away, overwhelmed by the choice before her. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because no one should live in fear," Tyler said simply. "And because from the moment I saw you by that creek, you haven't felt like a stranger to me." His words stirred something deep within her, something she had thought long dead after years of Vernon's systematic destruction of her spirit and self-worth. "How would we do it?" she asked finally, still not looking at him. "The cattle drive leaves at dawn on Friday. Vernon will be at the stockyards to complete the paperwork and pay us. If you can meet me at the creek where we first met, just before sunrise, I can hide you among the remuda, our spare horses. By the time he realizes you're gone, we'll be miles away." It sounded so simple, yet Rebecca knew the reality would be far more complicated. "What about my mother? Vernon supports her. If I disappear, he might take his anger out on her." Tyler considered this. "Where does she live?" "With my aunt in St. Louis. Vernon sends money monthly." "Once you're safe at Triple M, we can arrange to get word to her. Make sure she's protected." Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself, torn between hope and terror. "And what happens after? What kind of life could I have as a runaway wife?" "A free one," Tyler said softly. "You could start over, Rebecca. Become whoever you want to be." The possibility was dizzying. Rebecca had spent so long conforming to Vernon's expectations, she scarcely remembered who she had been before him. A sudden noise from the front of the house made them both freeze. Rebecca's heart leaped to her throat as she recognized Vernon's heavy tread on the porch steps. "The pantry," she whispered frantically, pointing. "Quickly!" Tyler slipped into the pantry just as the front door opened. Rebecca busied herself at the stove, trying to calm her racing pulse. "Rebecca!" Vernon called. "In the kitchen," she answered, amazed at how steady her voice sounded. Vernon appeared in the doorway, his expression suspicious. "Why aren't you in the parlor working on your embroidery?" "I was just preparing lunch," Rebecca explained, gesturing to the pot of soup she had been warming. Vernon's eyes narrowed as he scanned the kitchen. "I thought I heard voices." "Just me talking to myself, I'm afraid." Rebecca forced a self-deprecating smile. "A bad habit when I'm alone all day." For a terrible moment she thought he would search the house. Instead, he merely grunted and reached for his pocket watch. "I forgot some paperwork. Have to return to the bank immediately." He gave her a hard look. "Stay inside, I'll be back for dinner." Rebecca nodded, hardly daring to breathe until she heard the front door close behind him. She waited until his footsteps faded completely before rushing to the pantry. Tyler emerged, his face grim. "He suspects something." "He always suspects something," Rebecca said, her hands shaking. "But he'll be gone for hours now. You should leave while it's safe." Tyler nodded reluctantly. "Friday at dawn, then, at the creek." Rebecca took a deep breath, knowing her answer would irrevocably alter the course of her life. "Yes, I'll be there. Pack only what you can carry easily. Wear practical clothes." And Rebecca, Tyler's expression softened. "If anything changes, if he becomes more dangerous before Friday, go to Mrs. Holloway's farm. I've spoken with her. She'll hide you until I can come." Rebecca stared at him in shock. "You spoke with Mrs. Holloway?" "She approached me yesterday, said she's been worried about you for months." Tyler smiled slightly. "You have more allies than you know." After Tyler left, Rebecca moved through the house like a sleepwalker, her mind racing with plans and fears. Could she really do this? Did she have the courage to defy not only Vernon but all the social conventions that bound a wife to her husband, regardless of his treatment? The next day passed in agonizing slowness. Vernon was preoccupied with finalizing the cattle deal, which kept him away from home for most of the day. When he returned for dinner, he was in an unusually cheerful mood, talking expansively about their future. "The property in Indian Territory will be ready next week," he announced over dessert. "I've hired men to prepare the house. It's smaller than this one, but isolated. Just you and me, miles from the nearest neighbor." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You'll have plenty of time to remember your wifely duties without town gossips filling your head with nonsense." Rebecca forced herself to nod agreeably while her stomach twisted with dread. "It sounds wonderful, Vernon. We'll leave next Wednesday," he continued, watching her face carefully. "Pack only necessities. We can purchase new furnishings later." "So soon?" Rebecca couldn't entirely hide her dismay. "What about your business here? My new assistant manager will handle it." Vernon's expression hardened. "Don't question my decisions, Rebecca. The arrangements are made." That night, Vernon insisted on conjugal relations, his hands rough and possessive on her body as he reminded her that she belonged to him in every way possible. Rebecca endured his attentions with the detachment she had cultivated over years of such encounters. Her mind focused on the creek where she would meet Tyler at dawn, less than 8 hours away. When Vernon finally slept, Rebecca lay awake beside him, counting his breaths, waiting for the deep, rhythmic pattern that indicated he was truly unconscious. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window frames and carrying the promise of rain. Perfect weather for covering her tracks, if she could only make it to the creek undetected. At 4 in the morning, Rebecca slipped silently from the bed. Vernon stirred but didn't wake. Moving with the stealth of long practice, she dressed in her plainest skirt and blouse, adding a heavy shawl against the pre-dawn chill. Her carpetbag was already packed, hidden in the pantry beneath the loose floorboard. Rebecca crept downstairs, avoiding the steps that creaked. The house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the occasional groan of timbers in the wind. She retrieved her bag from its hiding place and paused at the back door, listening intently for any sound from upstairs. Nothing. Only the rising wind and distant rumble of thunder. With trembling fingers, Rebecca unbolted the back door and stepped into the darkness. The air was heavy with the scent of coming rain, the sky obscured by clouds that blocked the stars. She moved quickly across the yard, staying close to the shadows of trees and outbuildings. The path to the creek was familiar enough that she could follow it even in near total darkness. Rebecca picked her way carefully down the slope, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might wake the entire town. The wind whipped at her skirts and hair as if nature itself urged her forward, away from the prison of her marriage. At the creek, Rebecca paused, squinting into the darkness. There was no sign of Tyler yet. She checked the small watch pinned to her shawl 10 minutes before their agreed meeting time. She settled on a boulder to wait, clutching her carpetbag to her chest like a shield. Minutes passed, each one stretching like an eternity. The eastern sky began to lighten almost imperceptibly, a slightly less dense darkness that hinted at the coming dawn. Still no sign of Tyler. Doubt began to gnaw at Rebecca's resolve. What if he had changed his mind? What if something had happened to prevent him from coming? A twig snapped behind her. Rebecca whirled, hope and fear warring within her. "Going somewhere, my dear." Vernon stood on the path, a lantern in one hand, a pistol in the other. His face was a mask of cold fury in the flickering light. Rebecca stumbled backward, nearly falling into the creek. "Vernon, I save your lies." His voice was eerily calm. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice your preparations? That I haven't been watching you, waiting to see just how far you would go in betraying me?" Rebecca clutched her bag tighter, her mind racing for an explanation he might believe. "I couldn't sleep. I was just walking with a packed bag, dressed for travel," Vernon laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "I've known about your cowboy since the moment he approached you at this very creek. Mrs. Holloway's grandson is quite observant and well paid for his information." Horror washed over Rebecca as the full extent of Vernon's deception became clear. He had known everything, had been playing with her like a cat with a cornered mouse. "Vernon, please," she whispered, backing away as he advanced. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I'll come home now. We can forget this happened." "Oh, I don't think so." Vernon raised the pistol. "You've made your choice, Rebecca. Now you'll face the consequences." Rebecca looked desperately around for some means of escape, but the creek behind her was too wide to jump, the banks too steep to climb quickly. She was trapped. "Your cowboy won't be joining us, by the way," Vernon continued conversationally. "I had a word with some associates of mine. They're ensuring Mr. Blackwell is delayed." Terror clutched at Rebecca's heart. "What have you done to him?" "Nothing. He won't survive, probably." Vernon's smile was chilling. "Now we're going home, and after I've taught you the cost of betrayal, we're leaving for Indian Territory. Today. No more delays." Rebecca knew with bone-deep certainty that if she went with Vernon now, she would never again have a chance at freedom. Whatever awaited her in Indian Territory would be far worse than anything she had yet endured. "No," she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. "I'm not going back, Vernon." His expression darkened. "You don't have a choice." He lunged forward, grabbing for her arm. Rebecca dodged, her feet slipping on the muddy bank. As Vernon reached for her again, she swung her carpetbag with all her strength, catching him across the face. He staggered back, momentarily stunned. Taking advantage of his disorientation, Rebecca turned and plunged into the creek. The icy water shocked her system, but desperation drove her forward, struggling against the current that pulled at her skirts. "Rebecca!" Vernon roared behind her. "Stop this madness now!" She ignored him, fighting her way toward the opposite bank. The creek was deeper than she had anticipated, the current stronger. Her sodden clothing weighed her down, and her carpetbag slipped from her grasp, disappearing into the swirling water. A gunshot cracked through the dawn air. Water splashed near Rebecca's head as Vernon's bullet struck just inches from her. Terror gave her renewed strength as she continued struggling toward the far shore. "The next one won't miss," Vernon called, his voice carrying clearly over the sound of rushing water. "This is your last chance, Rebecca. Come back now or die here." Rebecca hesitated, treading water as she considered her options. Death or a living hell with Vernon, was there really a choice? "I'd rather die free than live as your prisoner," she called back, her voice steadier than she felt. Vernon raised the pistol again, his face contorted with rage. "So be it." As he took aim, a thundering of hooves broke the morning stillness. From the trees on the far bank, a rider emerged at full gallop. Tyler Blackwell, his face bloodied but his aim true as he fired his own pistol. The shot went wide, but it was enough to startle Vernon, making him misfire. His bullet plunged harmlessly into the water as Tyler reached the creek's edge and drove his horse directly into the water toward Rebecca. "Take my hand," he shouted, extending his arm as the horse fought against the current. Rebecca lunged for his outstretched hand, her fingers closing around his wrist as he hauled her from the water with strength born of desperation. In one fluid motion, he pulled her up behind him on the horse. "Hold tight," Tyler commanded as he wheeled the animal around, spurring it toward the far bank. Vernon's enraged shout followed them, punctuated by another gunshot that whistled past their heads. Tyler kept low over the horse's neck, shielding Rebecca with his body as they scrambled up the slippery bank. "You're dead, Blackwell," Vernon screamed, firing again. "Both of you, I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth." Tyler didn't slow, guiding his horse through the trees with the skill of a man born to the saddle. Rebecca clung to his waist, her wet clothes plastered to her body, her teeth chattering from cold and fear. "Are you hurt?" Tyler called over his shoulder as they galloped away from the creek. "And no," Rebecca managed through her shivers. "But Vernon said his men, they tried." Tyler's voice was grim. "Caught me leaving the boarding house. I was delayed, but they weren't expecting me to fight quite so hard." They emerged from the trees onto open prairie as the first light of dawn broke across the horizon. In the distance, Rebecca could make out the cattle herd and the cowboys preparing for departure. "We need to move fast," Tyler said, urging his horse to greater speed. "Vernon will gather men and come after us. Can you ride on your own?" "Yes," Rebecca assured him, though she had limited experience with horses. When they reached the herd, Tyler quickly explained the situation to his men. To Rebecca's surprise, they responded with immediate understanding and support. "Stevens is well known around these parts, boss," one grizzled cowboy said. "Not well liked either. We'll help the lady." Another rider offered Rebecca his slicker and hat. A third produced a spare set of men's clothing from his saddlebag. "My sister's about your size, madam. She packed these for me, but you need 'em more." Within minutes, Rebecca found herself dressed in rough men's clothing, mounted on a steady bay mare, her wet dress and remaining possessions bundled away in a saddlebag. The transformation was remarkable, with her hair tucked up under the wide-brimmed hat and the oversized slicker hiding her figure. She could easily pass for a young cowhand at a distance. "Stay in the middle of the herd," Tyler instructed as the cattle began to move northward. "Keep your head down and your hat low. If we're stopped or followed, let me do the talking." Rebecca nodded, still struggling to believe she had actually escaped. The enormity of what she had done, defying her husband, breaking her marriage vows, becoming in the eyes of the law a runaway wife, threatened to overwhelm her. "What if he catches up to us?" she asked as they rode side by side, the cattle lowing softly ahead of them. Tyler's expression hardened. "He won't, and if he tries," he patted the rifle in his saddle scabbard, "his threats die with me here, I promise you that." The conviction in his voice steadied Rebecca's nerves. For the first time in years, she felt something like hope blossoming in her chest. She straightened in the saddle, her eyes fixed on the horizon and the promise of freedom that lay beyond it. They had been traveling for about 2 hours when one of the outriders galloped back to Tyler, his expression urgent. "Riders coming up fast behind us, boss." "Looks like Stevens and maybe 5 or 6 men." Tyler's jaw tightened. "How far?" "Quarter-mile and closing." Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. "He'll kill us both." "No, he won't." Tyler turned to the gathered cowboys. "Dusty, take half the men and keep the herd moving. Joe, you and the others come with me. We're going to have a conversation with Mr. Stevens." Before Rebecca could protest, Tyler had positioned his horse directly in front of hers, his blue eyes intense. "Stay with the herd. Keep moving north. If something happens to me, these men will see you safely to the Triple M." "Tyler, no," Rebecca began, reaching for his arm. "Trust me." He covered her hand with his, the touch brief but reassuring. I didn't come this far to lose you now." With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped back toward the approaching riders, 4 of his men following close behind. Rebecca watched them go, her heart in her throat, torn between following Tyler's instructions and riding after him. "Best do as the boss says, madam," Dusty, the older cowboy now leading the herd, advised gently. "Mr. Blackwell knows what he's about, and he's got good men with him." Rebecca nodded reluctantly and continued forward with the cattle, though every instinct screamed at her to turn back. The minutes crawled by like hours as she strained to hear any sound of confrontation behind them. Finally, the faint pop of gunshots reached her ears. Rebecca pulled her horse to a halt, her hands white-knuckled on the reins. More shots followed, then silence. "Keep moving, madam," Dusty urged, though his weathered face showed concern. "Nothing we can do from here." Rebecca shook her head. "I can't leave them. I can't leave him." Before Dusty could stop her, she had turned her horse and was galloping back toward the sounds of conflict. The mare responded eagerly to her urgency, eating up the distance with powerful strides. As she crested a small rise, Rebecca saw the confrontation unfolding in the valley below. Tyler and his men had dismounted and taken positions behind rocks and in shallow depressions, their rifles trained on Vernon and his group, who had similarly taken cover. Vernon's voice carried clearly in the morning air. "Send out my wife, Blackwell, and the rest of you can ride away." "This isn't your fight. The lady's made her choice," Tyler called back. "Go home, Stevens, there's nothing for you here." "She's my property." Vernon's rage was palpable even at this distance. "The law's on my side." "The law might be," Tyler acknowledged, "but we're not discussing law out here. We're discussing what's right. And keeping a woman against her will, beating her, threatening her life, that ain't right by any measure." Rebecca urged her horse down the slope, ignoring Dusty, who had followed her and was now calling for her to stop. As she approached, all eyes turned to her, Tyler's filled with concern, Vernon's with murderous fury. "Rebecca," Vernon snarled, "get over here now. This farce has gone on long enough." Rebecca reined in her horse between the two groups, her back straight, her chin lifted in defiance. "No, Vernon. I'm not coming back. Not now, not ever. You ungrateful whore," Vernon spat. "After everything I've given you, bruises, fear, a life of servitude." Rebecca's voice grew stronger with each word. "I don't want your gifts anymore, Vernon. I want my freedom." Vernon raised his pistol, aiming directly at her. "If I can't have you, no one will." Several things happened at once. Tyler shouted a warning and lunged forward. One of Vernon's men, apparently unwilling to participate in the murder of a woman, grabbed Vernon's arm. The gun discharged, the bullet going wide. In the chaos that followed, Rebecca barely had time to register Tyler tackling Vernon to the ground before more shots rang out. Men shouted, horses reared, and dust filled the air. When it cleared, 2 of Vernon's hired guns lay wounded, the others had fled, and Tyler stood over Vernon, his pistol trained on the merchant's head. "It's over, Stevens," Tyler said, his voice deadly calm. "You've lost." Vernon, his face contorted with hate, stared up at Tyler. "Kill me then. Because as long as I'm alive, I'll never stop hunting her." Tyler's finger tightened on the trigger. For a terrible moment, Rebecca thought he might actually pull it. "Tyler, don't," she pleaded, dismounting and moving to his side. "He's not worth hanging for." Tyler's gaze never left Vernon. "This man will never leave us in peace, Rebecca. You know that." "I know," she acknowledged softly, "but killing him makes us no better than him." Tyler hesitated, then slowly lowered his pistol. "You're right, but we need to ensure he can't follow us immediately." He glanced at his men. "Tie him up. We'll leave him for the town marshal to find. Those charges of assault and attempted murder should keep him occupied for a while." As the cowboys bound Vernon's hands and feet, he continued to hurl threats and obscenities at Rebecca and Tyler. But his words had lost their power over her. With each mile that would soon separate them, his hold on her life would diminish. "This isn't over," Vernon called as they prepared to leave him and his wounded men. "You'll never be free of me, Rebecca. Never." Rebecca looked down at the man who had been her tormentor for 3 long years. "Goodbye, Vernon. I hope you find peace someday." His only response was a string of curses that faded behind them as they rode away, rejoining the cattle drive heading north. The journey to the Triple M Ranch took 4 more days. They traveled from dawn until dusk, pushing the cattle at a steady pace across the Oklahoma Territory and into Kansas. Rebecca quickly adapted to life on the trail, learning to ride for hours without complaint, to help with camp duties, and to appreciate the simple camaraderie of the cowboys who had risked their lives to help her. At night, sitting beside the campfire, she and Tyler talked for hours. He told her about growing up on his family's small ranch in Texas, about losing his mother to his father's violence, about working his way up from ranch hand to foreman through hard work and determination. Rebecca shared stories of her childhood on her father's farm, her dreams of becoming a teacher before her marriage to Vernon, her hopes for a future where she might reclaim some part of the person she used to be. "What will you do once we reach the Triple M?" Tyler asked on their 3rd night on the trail. They sat slightly apart from the others, their shoulders nearly touching as they gazed into the flames. Rebecca sighed. "I don't know. I have no money, no possessions, no skills that would earn me a living." "That's not true," Tyler countered. "You're educated, resourceful, stronger than you know, and you have friends now." Rebecca smiled at him, the firelight casting a warm glow on his features. "I do, don't I? It's strange to think that a week ago I believed I was completely alone." "You'll never be alone again if I have any say in the matter," Tyler said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. The intensity of his gaze made Rebecca's breath catch. "Tyler, I'm still legally married. Even if Vernon is imprisoned, I'm not free to, I know." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "And I'd never ask you to compromise yourself, but there are lawyers who specialize in cases like yours. Divorces can be granted on grounds of cruelty. It might take time, but it's possible." Hope, that dangerous emotion she had suppressed for so long, flared brightly in Rebecca's chest. "And until then, the Triple M has a small caretaker's cottage that needs an occupant. And a ranch owner who'd be mighty pleased to have an educated woman help with the accounts and correspondence." Tyler smiled. "Mrs. Garner, the owner's wife, has been looking for someone just like you." Rebecca squeezed his hand, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. "You've thought of everything." "I've thought of you," Tyler said simply. The rest just followed naturally. On the evening of the 4th day, they crested a hill, and the Triple M Ranch came into view. Nestled in a verdant valley with a creek winding through lush pastures, it looked like paradise to Rebecca's weary eyes. A large white farmhouse stood on a gentle rise, surrounded by barns, corrals, and smaller outbuildings. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth and welcome. As they drove the cattle into the holding pens, an older couple emerged from the house. The man was tall and robust despite his gray hair, while the woman was petite with a kind face creased by years of sun and laughter. "Tyler," the woman called, waving enthusiastically. "We were getting worried. You're 2 days late." Tyler dismounted and helped Rebecca down from her horse, keeping a supportive hand at her elbow. "Had some unexpected developments, Mrs. Garner. I'd like you to meet Rebecca Stevens, Mrs." Garner's warm brown eyes assessed Rebecca quickly, taking in the men's clothing, the exhaustion evident in her posture, and the fading bruise on her cheek. Understanding dawned immediately in the older woman's face. "Well, Miss Rebecca," she said, deliberately dropping the Mrs. and extending her hand, "you look like you could use a hot bath, a good meal, and a safe place to rest. We have all three in abundance here at the Triple M." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Garner. I'm afraid I've arrived with nothing but the clothes on my back." "Clothes can be replaced," Mr. Garner said gruffly. "Safety and peace of mind are harder to come by." He nodded to Tyler. "You did right, son." Tyler's hand found Rebecca's, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I had no choice, sir. Not once I met her." That night, after the bath and meal Mrs. Garner had promised, Rebecca sat in a rocking chair on the porch of the caretaker's cottage. The small house was simple but immaculately clean, with cheerful curtains at the windows and a vase of wildflowers on the table, Mrs. Garner's welcoming touches. Rebecca wore a borrowed nightgown and robe, her damp hair hanging loose down her back, her body finally beginning to relax after days of tension and fear. The sound of boots on the porch steps made her look up. Tyler stood at the bottom of the steps, his hat in his hands, uncertainty in his normally confident posture. "May I join you?" he asked. Rebecca nodded, gesturing to the second rocking chair. "Of course." Tyler sat beside her, placing his hat on the porch railing. For a few moments, they rocked in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, distant lowing of cattle, chirping of crickets, the soft hooting of an owl. "The Garners are good people," Rebecca said finally. "You're fortunate to work for them." Tyler nodded. "They're like family to me. Have been since I arrived here 5 years ago with nothing but my horse and saddle. They seem to approve of what you did, helping me. They understand about bad marriages," Tyler explained. "Mrs. Garner's sister was killed by her husband years ago. They've never forgotten." Rebecca shivered despite the mild evening. "Do you think Vernon will come after us?" Tyler's expression hardened. "He might try, but he'll have to get past the attempted murder charges first, and even if he does, he'll find more than just me waiting for him here. The Triple M takes care of its own." "I'm not really one of your own," Rebecca pointed out. "I'm just a runaway wife you found by a creek." Tyler turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You're much more than that, Rebecca, at least to me." The simple sincerity in his voice made her heart race. "Tyler, I don't know what the future holds. I don't even know who I am without Vernon's shadow hanging over me." "Then we'll find out together," he said, reaching across the space between their chairs to take her hand. "No rush, no pressure. Just two people learning to trust again." Rebecca looked down at their joined hands, as large and calloused from years of ranch work, hers smaller but no longer soft, bearing the marks of her own labors and struggles. Two imperfect hands, finding each other against all odds. "I'd like that," she whispered. In the days that followed, Rebecca began to build a new life at the Triple M. Mrs. Garner proved to be not only kind but practical, helping Rebecca obtain new clothing, introducing her to the ranch routines, and teaching her the bookkeeping system that had been neglected in the owner's advancing years. Tyler kept a respectful distance during the day, busy with his foreman duties, but each evening he would appear at her cottage, sometimes bringing a small gift: wildflowers, a book from the Garner's library, fresh eggs from the henhouse, and they would talk on the porch until the stars filled the sky. 2 weeks after her arrival, a letter came from Mrs. Holloway. Vernon had indeed been charged with assault, an attempted murder based on statements from Tyler's cowboys who had witnessed the confrontation. He was being held in the county jail awaiting trial, his business now managed by his assistant. More importantly, Mrs. Holloway had contacted Rebecca's mother in St. Louis, assuring her of her daughter's safety without revealing her exact location. "Your mother sends her love," Mrs. Holloway wrote. "She says she always feared for you with Vernon and prays you've found peace at last. She asks only that you write to her when you feel safe to do so." The letter brought both relief and tears. Rebecca had worried constantly about her mother, fearing Vernon might somehow take revenge on her. Knowing she was safe and supportive lifted an enormous weight from Rebecca's shoulders. As spring deepened into summer, Rebecca flourished in her new environment. Her bruises faded, her spirits lifted, and she began to rediscover the confident young woman she had been before Vernon crushed her spirit. She learned to ride properly, to help with simple ranch chores, and even to shoot a rifle, a skill Tyler insisted she master for her own protection. Her relationship with Tyler evolved gradually, built on mutual respect and growing affection. There were no declarations of love, no improper advances, just the steady deepening of a connection that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances. In July, another letter arrived, this one from a lawyer in Kansas City, whom the Garners had contacted on Rebecca's behalf. He explained that given the evidence of Vernon's cruelty and the criminal charges against him, Rebecca had strong grounds for divorce. The process would be complicated but not impossible. He required only her signature on several documents to begin proceedings. That evening, Rebecca sat on her porch steps, the lawyer's letter in her hands, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. The possibility of legal freedom from Vernon seemed almost too much to hope for. Tyler found her there, his day's work complete, his face lighting up at the sight of her as it always did. "Everything all right?" he asked, noting her pensive expression. Rebecca handed him the letter. "It seems I might be free sooner than I expected." Tyler read quickly, his smile growing. "This is wonderful news, Rebecca." "It is," she agreed, "but part of me is afraid to believe it could be so simple." "Nothing about what you've been through has been simple," Tyler pointed out, sitting beside her on the steps. "You've earned this chance at freedom." Rebecca leaned against him slightly, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "What if the divorce is granted? What then?" Tyler's arm slipped around her shoulders, a gesture that had become familiar and cherished in recent weeks. "Then you decide what you want your life to be. No one else." Rebecca turned to look at him, seeing in his eyes everything she had come to love about this man: his honesty, his strength, his unwavering respect for her choices. "And if what I want includes you," the hope that blazed across his face was answer enough, but Tyler put it into words anyway. "Then I'd be the happiest man in Kansas, Rebecca Stevens." She smiled, realizing it was the first time she had spoken of a future with him so directly. "I think I'd like that very much." Tyler's hand came up to gently cup her cheek. "May I kiss you, Rebecca?" "I've been wanting to since that first day by the creek." In answer, Rebecca leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening as Tyler pulled her closer. It held none of the demanding possession of Vernon's kisses, only warmth, tenderness, and the promise of more to come. When they finally parted, Tyler rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Rebecca. I think I have since the moment I saw you standing there with your bare feet in the creek, looking like a dream I never knew I had." Rebecca's heart swelled with emotions she had thought long dead. "I love you too, Tyler. You saved more than my life that day. You saved my soul." Autumn brought changes to the Triple M. The cattle were rounded up, some driven to market, others kept for breeding. The fields were harvested, the gardens put to bed for winter. Rebecca's divorce proceedings continued, slowed by Vernon's attempts to contest them, but moving inexorably forward thanks to the diligence of her lawyer. As the leaves turned gold and red, Rebecca received word that Vernon's trial had concluded. He had been convicted of assault and attempted murder, sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison. The news brought a complex mix of emotions: relief that he was contained, sadness for the waste of a human life, and finally, a sense of closure that allowed her to look forward without constantly glancing over her shoulder. On a crisp October evening, Tyler took Rebecca riding to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. The valley below was painted in autumn colors, the white farmhouse standing out against the backdrop of golden fields and russet woods. "It's beautiful up here," Rebecca said, breathing in the clean, cool air. "I can see why you wanted to show me." Tyler helped her dismount, then spread a blanket on the ground. From his saddlebag, he produced a small picnic bread, cheese, apples, and a bottle of cider. "The view's not the only reason I brought you here," he admitted as they settled on the blanket. "I wanted someplace special for this conversation." Rebecca's heart quickened. "What conversation?" Tyler took her hands in his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "Rebecca, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, watching you grow stronger every day, falling more in love with you than I ever thought possible. It's been a miracle I never expected." Rebecca squeezed his hands, tears pricking her eyes. "For me too, Tyler. Your divorce papers came through yesterday," he continued. "Mr. Garner received them while you were helping Mrs. Garner with the preserving." Rebecca gasped. "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" "Because I wanted to do this properly." Tyler reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, intricately carved with wildflowers. "My father made this for my mother when they were first married, before the drinking changed him. It's the one good thing I have from him." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "And now, if you'll have it, I'd like it to be yours." Rebecca stared at the ring, then at Tyler's face, hardly daring to believe what was happening. "Tyler, are you Rebecca Stevens?" he said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "I'm asking you to be my wife. Not as a man who would own you or control you, but as someone who wants to walk beside you for all the days we have left. Someone who will cherish your strength, respect your independence, and love you with every breath in his body." Tears flowed freely down Rebecca's cheeks now. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Tyler Blackwell, I will marry you." Tyler slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise of their shared future. Rebecca returned his kiss with equal passion, marveling at how far she had come from that terrified woman trembling under her husband's threats. They were married on Christmas Day, in the Garners' parlor decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. Mrs. Garner had insisted on making Rebecca a proper wedding dress, simple but elegant ivory silk that made her auburn hair glow like fire in the candlelight. Tyler wore his best suit, his face solemn but his eyes never leaving Rebecca as they spoke their vows. The ceremony was small, just the Garners, a few trusted ranch hands, Mrs. Holloway, who had made the journey from Oklahoma, and to Rebecca's overwhelming joy, her mother, who had arrived by train the day before, frail but determined to see her daughter wed to a good man. "I've prayed for this day," her mother whispered as she embraced Rebecca after the ceremony. "To see you happy, truly happy, is all I've ever wanted." "I am happy, Mama," Rebecca assured her. "Happier than I ever thought possible." As winter settled over the Triple M, Rebecca and Tyler began their married life in the foreman's house, a comfortable 2-story dwelling closer to the main ranch house than Rebecca's cottage had been. Mrs. Garner had helped furnish it. Mr. Garner had ensured it was in perfect repair, and together Rebecca and Tyler had made it a home. Their days fell into a rhythm of work and companionship, their nights into a deeper intimacy, as they explored the physical expression of their love, a revelation to Rebecca, who had never known tenderness in Vernon's bed. Tyler was a patient and generous lover, teaching her that passion between a man and a woman could be beautiful rather than frightening, mutual rather than demanded. In February, Mr. Garner called them both to the main house one evening after dinner. He and Mrs. Garner sat them down in the parlor, exchanging meaningful glances before Mr. Garner cleared his throat. "Martha and I have been talking," he began, nodding toward his wife. "We're not getting any younger, and this ranch is a lot for old bones to manage." "You're hardly in your dotage, sir," Tyler said with a smile. "But if there's more I can do as foreman—" "It's not about doing more as foreman, son," Mr. Garner interrupted. "It's about becoming a partner." Tyler stared at him, confusion evident on his face. "Sir, we never had children of our own," Mrs. Garner explained, her eyes warm as she looked at the young couple. "But if we had been blessed with a son, we would have wanted him to be just like you, Tyler. And now that you've brought Rebecca into our lives as well, what Martha's trying to say," Mr. Garner continued, "is that we want to make you both partners in the Triple M. 1/3 ownership now, with the rest to come to you when we're gone. This place needs young blood, new ideas. It needs a family to carry it forward." Rebecca gasped, reaching for Tyler's hand. "Mr. Garner, Mrs. Garner, we don't know what to say." "Say yes," Mrs. Garner urged. "Say you'll make this ranch your legacy, your children's birthright." Tyler looked at Rebecca, a question in his eyes. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "We'd be honored," Tyler said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "More than honored, humbled by your faith in us." "It's settled then," Mr. Garner said gruffly, standing to shake Tyler's hand. "I'll have the papers drawn up next week." As spring returned to Kansas, bringing with it new calves, fresh grass, and wildflowers dotting the hillsides, Rebecca discovered she was expecting a child. The news filled her with equal parts joy and trepidation. Memories of Vernon's threats during her one brief pregnancy with him, ended in a miscarriage he had partly caused, still haunted her. But Tyler's reaction banished her fears. His face lit with wonder when she told him, his hands gentle as they rested on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, needing to hear the words. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Tyler assured her, gathering her into his arms. "I'm ecstatic, terrified, overwhelmed, but mostly I'm grateful. For you, for this child, for the life we're building together." As her body changed with the growing life inside her, Rebecca found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. From the desperate woman trembling under Vernon's threats to the confident wife and expectant mother, she now was the transformation seemed miraculous. One evening in early summer, she sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset as she often did, her hands resting on her rounded belly. Tyler joined her, bringing a glass of lemonade and settling beside her on the swing. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, putting his arm around her shoulders. Rebecca leaned into him, savoring his warmth and strength. "I was thinking about that day by the creek when you found me." Tyler's arm tightened slightly. "The day that changed everything. You said something to me then, do you remember? When I was afraid Vernon would find us, hurt us." Tyler nodded, his cheek resting against her hair. "His threats die with me here, I remember. You kept that promise," Rebecca said softly. "His threats did die. Not because you killed him, but because you showed me a different way to live, a way without fear." Tyler turned to look at her, his blue eyes soft with love. "You did that yourself, Rebecca. I just offered a hand when you needed one." "You offered more than that," she corrected, placing his hand on her stomach where their child kicked strongly. "You offered me a future." Tyler smiled, leaning in to kiss her gently. "And what a future it will be." In November of 1879, Rebecca gave birth to a healthy son they named James Thomas Blackwell. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair, a perfect blend of them both. As Rebecca held him in her arms, Tyler sitting beside them on the bed, she marveled at the completeness of her happiness. "He's perfect," Tyler whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger, laughing softly when James gripped it with surprising strength. "He is," Rebecca agreed. "And he'll never know anything but love and security. That's our promise to him." Tyler kissed her forehead, then the baby's. "A promise we'll keep every day of our lives." As James grew from infant to toddler, the Triple M prospered under Tyler and Rebecca's shared management. Mr. Garner gradually stepped back from daily operations, though he remained a valued advisor, while Mrs. Garner delighted in her role as honorary grandmother to young James. In the spring of 1881, Rebecca received unexpected news. A letter arrived from Enid, forwarded by Mrs. Holloway. Vernon Stevens had died in prison not from violence but from pneumonia that had swept through the facility during the harsh winter. Rebecca read the letter twice, searching her heart for her reaction. There was no joy in the news, no sense of triumph or vindication, only a quiet relief that the final shadow over her new life had lifted. That evening, she showed the letter to Tyler as they sat by the fire after putting James to bed. He read it silently, then looked up at her with concern. "How do you feel about this?" he asked gently. Rebecca considered the question carefully. "At peace, I think. I never wished him dead despite everything, but knowing he's gone means I'll never have to fear him finding us, never have to worry about James being exposed to his hatred." Tyler nodded, folding the letter and setting it aside. Vernon was a product of his time, in many ways a time when men believed they owned their wives, when cruelty was dismissed as discipline. But that time is changing, Rebecca. Slowly, perhaps, but changing nonetheless. "And we're part of that change," Rebecca said, settling beside him on the sofa. "By the way we live, the way we love each other, the way we'll raise our son to respect women as equals." Tyler smiled, pulling her close. "And any other children who might join our family." Rebecca laughed softly, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach. "About that?" Tyler's eyes widened. "Rebecca, are you saying James will have a brother or sister by Christmas?" she confirmed, her eyes shining with happiness. Tyler's whoop of joy brought Mrs. Garner hurrying in from the kitchen, only to join in the celebration when the news was shared. True to Rebecca's prediction, their daughter Emily Rose was born in December, completing their family circle as the old year gave way to new. On a clear spring morning in 1883, Rebecca stood on the hilltop where Tyler had proposed to her years before. At 32, she had blossomed into a woman of quiet confidence and deep joy. Behind her, Tyler supervised 5-year-old James as he rode his pony, while 2-year-old Emily gathered wildflowers nearby. The Triple M spread out below her, green pastures dotted with healthy cattle, fields ready for planting, the main house and outbuildings freshly painted and well maintained. Their home a home built on love, respect, and the courage to reach for freedom against all odds. As she watched her family, Rebecca remembered the terrified woman she had been, trembling from her husband's threats. That woman seemed like a stranger now, a ghost from another life. In her place stood Rebecca Blackwell, wife, mother, partner, survivor. Tyler joined her at the edge of the hilltop, slipping his arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked, though he knew the answer. Rebecca smiled up at him, the man who had kept his promise that day by the creek. "Completely," she replied. And it was true. For Rebecca had learned the most important lesson of her journey. True freedom wasn't just about escaping what hurt you, it was about finding the courage to embrace what healed you. And in Tyler's love, in their children's laughter, in the life they had built together, she had found healing beyond anything she could have imagined on that blood-red dawn when she first dared to dream of freedom.